Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. Today's patron is ASDFJKLSC, who has decided to let me choose a topic. As such, I'm going a bit off the beaten path and choosing an old webcomic that happens to be one of my all-time favorites. The comic's name is Narbonic by author Shannon K. Garrity, and its original run spanned 6 years from 2000 to 2005. About the author. Shannon K. Garrity is a resident of Berkeley, California, and a graduate of Vassar College, which is in upstate New York. She moved to Berkeley soon after graduating in the year 2000. Not long after that, she started her first webcomic, Narbonic. The comic would run almost daily for the next 6 years. I say almost because she ran special features on Sunday. And during that time, she went through a few jobs connected to comics, manga, and editing. She continues to work in the industry to this day. And she also has a Patreon for her current webcomic, which she's been making ever since Narbonic ended. That comic is called Skin Horse and exists within the same universe she created for Narbonic, and incidentally, she met her co-writer for Skin Horse, Jeffrey C. Wells, when he wrote a fanfiction story for Narbonic, and she liked it so much she put it up on her site. Now there's not much else to say about the creators, so let's move on. The review. Dave Davenport is a computer science major who graduates from college and then immediately gets a job as an IT specialist for a mad biologist named Helen Narbon. His co-workers include Mel the intern and eventually Artie, a super-intelligent gerbil, and the only non-evil person in the group. Over the years, Dave dies and gets resurrected, turns into a woman, reveals the existence of the Dave conspiracy, gets unstuck in time, foils a rival mad scientist named Lupin Madblood, and slowly starts to fall in love with his boss. At the same time, Dave also becomes a little unhinged, partly because Helen uses him to discover that madness with a capital M is partly genetic and partly environmental. Then the day finally comes when Dave snaps, and while things get hectic, Helen eventually manages to create a happy ending. First off, I should mention that the art for Narbonic is pretty rough at the beginning, and the first arc in particular features things like tiny writing, odd issues with perspective, and a gun drawn by someone who is only vaguely aware of what guns should look like. Still, the character designs are fully fleshed out and would stay on model for the comic's entire run, and you can actively see Garrity's skill improve as the years go on. Something else to note is that Narbonic is a daily comic, and while Garrity never tried to get it into newspapers, it does mostly follow the traditional comic strip format. This includes having the comic end with a joke in the last panel, and because of this, the tone of the comic is always pretty light, even when it covers dramatic events and serious topics. For the most part, I appreciated this effort, but not all of the jokes are equally witty. A lot of them are non sequiturs and pop culture references that don't really add anything to the story and make it very much a product of the times. But at the same time, it adds a certain anthropological value, since it shows what nerdy people in America were worried about in the early 2000s. But, above all else, the thing that really impresses me about Narbonic is the story. Garrity has said that by the time she finished writing the first year of Narbonic, she had plotted out the storyline for the rest of the comic's run. Because she did this, she was able to set up story beats months in advance and foreshadow moments that wouldn't arrive until years later. This makes Narbonic especially rewarding during rereads, because you can see the hints she scatters through the comic and appreciate how much she had prepared for the final arc. Another thing I like is that the will-they-won't-they relationship between the two main leads gets resolved long before the final arc begins, and in fact they stay together for a good year before the third act breakup hits. For that matter, the breakup occurs for a very valid reason, and it's not just some miscommunication that could be resolved if the two parties had just sat down and talked about their issues. The rift between the two goes much deeper than that, and so they need a bigger bridge to span it. So, while Narbonic has its share of problems, and you can tell it's the author's first major work, the webcomic is full of interesting characters, zany plots, and heartfelt stories. You'll need to have been a teen or young adult during the early aughts to get the most from the comic, but I think anyone would enjoy reading it from start to finish. And if you do, then remember to turn the author's commentary off during the first read and then on for the second. Garrity provides a lot of insight into her writing process in her commentary, but she also spoils a lot of future plot points, so be sure to go in blind the first time. The analysis. Narbonic touches on a lot of interesting topics over its run. Some of those topics are deeper than you'd expect from how the comic starts, but then the hero who thwarts Helen Narbonne during the first arc constantly quotes Shakespeare, so maybe it's not that surprising. Some of the topics are very personal, like Helen's relationship with her horrible mother, or the issues she had growing up as a dangerous loner, but other topics are broader in scope, like transhumanism, the rights of artificial sapience, and ethics and scientific research. However, all of these topics orbit around two central questions that are visible in every story arc. Who am I, and where do I belong? Helen Narbonne never wanted to be a mad genius, but she was genetically predisposed to madness, and her mother slowly and intentionally drove her insane so that she could study how and why mad geniuses appear. She then spends much of the comic's run living in her mother's shadow and looking for a way to make her own mark on the mad science community. Dave is confident in his identity as an IT guy at first, but his exposure to the world of mad science constantly pushes his boundaries and places him in new situations that he would never have sought out on his own. Artie is a gerbil with a superhuman intellect, and so he has no idea what to do with himself in a world designed by and for humans. Then, just to add insult to injury, he undergoes a transformation late in the comic that forces him to reconsider all of his previous assumptions. The exception to all of this, at least within the main cast, is Mel the intern, who knows exactly who she is and what she wants from life. In fact, she has her own romance that goes much more smoothly than Helen and Dave's, and even the version of her in the dark future has a very specific goal and is dead set on making it a reality. Something else to note is that this theme perfectly matches with the ages of both the protagonists and the author. Dave and Helen are young adults who have just finished their education and entered the professional world. And that's a good time to start wondering who you're going to be and what you plan on doing with yourself. Likewise, Garrity had just entered the workforce when she started writing Narbonic, and so the idea of a professional identity was definitely on her mind, whether consciously or otherwise. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.